Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and best-selling author Chris Hedges is joining us today. You may know him from reading one of his best-selling books that will change your life and at least your perspective here on what's happening in the world. American Fascist, the Christian Right and the War on America, Empire of Illusion, the End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle. War is a force that gives us meaning, days of destruction, days of revolt, death of the liberal class. I could go on. And I believe there's a forthcoming one, but Chris's work has affected me deeply. Perhaps you watch his weekly interview show On Contact, where he interviews dissident voices currently missing from the mainstream media. He interviews the black sheep of the establishment, as they say, leading to discussions that are, not very easy to find on your television cable dial. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on our program here on ACT TV today. I appreciate it. Well, where do we start? Your recent piece about how we really are being given only one choice in the upcoming election. Can you talk a little bit about what that choice is?
This is the last piece I wrote for Truthdig before I was fired.
Yes. What happened over at Truthdig? When I went over there, they're like, we're taking a break. What happened?
Well, the publisher, who's a rich heiress, decided that she wanted to be the editor-in-chief, although has no real journalistic background and certainly lacks the emotional stability to run the place. And so she tried
Why is it that people with no skills think that they can do the job?
Because rich people surround themselves with obsequious toadies who tell them what they want to hear, and eventually they drift off into Never Never Land. We have a president in illustrating this every day at his briefing. So she tried to fire Bob Scheer, and the staff organized a work stoppage. They took over the site and posted the work stoppage on the site on March 11th, the announcement. The entire editorial staff, all the copy editors, myself, Paul Street, Lee Camp, and then we asked to form a union to counter a series of
That's not going to go over well.
Right. There are all these progressives are great about championing, civil and labor liberties until it affects them. So she refused to talk to us and got some high-priced lawyer. She's surrounded by high-priced lawyers who, has already issued like nasty letters to several of the staff, and we all got fired. And then they sent us not me, actually. I never got a letter.
Chris, how about just getting all the writers who got fired together and starting a site called Dig Truth? And
right.
Just
the problem,
take the content. Go.
The problem is money, because a lot of these people, the copy editors, the managing editor, Jake Sugarman, this was the only source of income they had. And remember, these people are not highly paid. We're talking about $20 an hour kind of work. But it was paid. So it's harder to do. And I'm writing a book now, and I have to keep focused on the writing. I'll find somewhere else to go. Bob Scheer called The Nation, but The Nation didn't want anything to do with me at all.
Really? The Nation doesn't want Chris Hedges?
No, of course not.
Shocking.
No, of course not. They're all going to be cheerleading Joe Biden. No, my favorite Nation, I don't go on the site very much. It's pretty bad, but the other day,
we just had John Nichols on yesterday.
This is an illustration.
But that's fine. Go ahead.
It's like, vote for who Biden should pick for vice president. I'm going, well, that's the American left. Okay.
That's where we're at. I don't know if that's the left. That's the Democratic establishment.
No, that's the retired. That's Democratic Party retirees, I think.
Yeah. Well, Truthdig is far more radical than, you have Juan Cole, Amy Goodman, Lee Camp. You have
Paul Street. Well, because we had Bob Scheer. Bob Scheer, who is just turned 84, is one of the great journalists in the United States. He's the editor of Ramparts. He's just been relentless. He was a columnist for many years for the Los Angeles Times until his continuous.
Until they didn't like truth.
They fired him because he wasn't cheerleading the first Gulf War, the invasion of Iraq, which is how I lost my job too. So No, and nobody was going to work at the place if Scheer wasn't there. So that anyway.
How is it that
happened.
some publishing house continues to publish your books? Not that I'm saying they shouldn't, but
it's make money. They don't care what's in them. They you know, they don't. The old days when actually I have a very good editor at Simon and Schuster, so I don't want to. But I would say generally within the industry, they don't care what's between the covers as long as people buy it. It's just a product. It's marketing. You know, they run the numbers. I think I've written 14 books. One of them didn't sell, or one of them didn't make the money back for the publisher. But I have friends, great writers, who, you know, 1-2 books, and they may have written huge, you know, very successful books. The 1 or 2 books that don't sell, they're out. They can't get a contract. But the whole notion of an editor who knows what a good book is. I mean, you go back to Vintage, to Faulkner. I mean, Faulkner's books never really sold in his lifetime, but they keep Vintage alive because Malcolm Cowley understood that they were classics. That's absolutely gone. It's why these big publishing houses veer towards celebrity books. You know, when I did a book once for
oh yeah, and Sirius
Random House. I forget. I had a fight with them and quit. But my editor was doing Tony Blair's book, for which they paid millions of dollars. Tony Blair didn't write a word of it. He had to fly over there and sit like a little lapdog outside Tony Blair's office, and then go in and record it and go back and type it up. And but yeah, that's what these large corporations, which own these big publishing houses, it's marketing. That's it. And
do you see the coronavirus having an impact on independent media?
Yeah, it's going to have a huge impact on media. It already has.
Yeah, I've read about a firing of journalists. You know,
everybody, Vice, you know, the papers. It's
just not us, Act TV. We're the only one left.
That's right.
Oh boy.
Yeah, because there's anybody who gets advertising. Truthdig attempted to get advertising, had some. Anybody who gets advertising, the ads have fallen off because the bottom's fallen out in the economy. It's not that people don't want information. Yeah, I mean, journalism itself has been in free fall ever since the internet. And I lived through all that because, you know, I started as a newspaper reporter in Central America in the 80s. So I have watched it all. The first hit was classified ads. 40% of newsprint revenue came from classified ads. So once people could go on Craigslist and stuff, that's like almost half of your income gone. And then as algorithms target you, so all this, you know, they build all these profiles and have all the information. They don't really need the press or newsprint in particular, or even an internet site, to connect readers with sellers. They can do that directly. So yeah, I mean, Barbara Ehrenreich has quite correctly said journalists have to go back to the era when they were all members of the working and even lower working class. You know, what's a sustainable model? Well, we sustained Truthdig for 16 years, but then when the rich person and to her credit, she did give significant sums of money. We had $1 million budget every year, but as soon as you know, all her friends in Santa Monica and everywhere else stopped or started disapproving of Scheer in particular, who wasn't buying the Russiagate stuff and has, you know, relentlessly hammered the corruption of the Democratic Party, and he loathes the Clintons as he should. And, you know, then that was it. It was over. So I don't know what a sustainable model is. I haven't figured out. I mean, RT's good. I mean, they have given me space on this show on Contact that that show, if we had a functioning system of public broadcasting, that would be on public broadcasting at like 1 a.m. It'd be like this old writer interviewing other writers, which is, I mostly just interview writers, but I read the books. It was kind of remarkable.
Well, that's different.
Yeah, it is different. I speak as a writer. I hate it. But in America, nobody, and there's no shame about it. They never read the books. So when I go on book tours, it's just Groundhog Day. That's why I get really depressed on book tours. But I read the books, and it's now there really is no place to go. I mean, Bill Moyers was the last show on public television that dealt with power. Bill would always have me on. I mean, usually for the whole show. That's gone. So yeah, that's what I do, and I enjoy it. And it gives. I mean, I would say probably 60-70% of the people I interview are authors.
Chris, we have a question that is related to your show on RT from T Lurker in our Twitch chat. Here's the question directly. As an RT host, you must be concerned by the way information is being censored by outlets such as Google and Facebook, who hide and deprioritize alternative sources, and YouTube, who mandate disclaimers on state news and conspiracy theories, but not corporate news and official talking points. To what extent is the fake news hoax being used to delete genuine news? And how far do you think the establishment will go to ban opposing points of view?
Wow, that's a smart question.
I got to tell you, we have highly intelligent people.
Not only that, it was pretty
others in here that I want to ask.
Okay, good. You should have him on or her on, whoever wrote it.
Maybe I will.
So that is the key. That's absolutely the key. And I take a lot of crap for being on RT, and my answer is don't watch it. I don't care.
Because the liberals are super mad about the Russiagate issue.
Yeah, because the liberals don't want to confront their own complicity in the reconfiguration of the political and economic system to create a corporate oligarchy and a world of such vast income disparity and power, which the Clinton administration put on steroids. And so they're blaming it on Russia. And by the way, I'm not sitting here telling you Russia did not interfere in the election. I don't know, I don't have proof, but I suspect they did. I suspect China did. But if we're going to talk about interference in our elections, let's talk about Israel, which has dwarfs what any other country does in terms of perverting our electoral process. But the idea that Trump is a product of Russian interference is not only ludicrous but dangerous. It's a form of demagoguery. It's the same kind of stuff Trump does, but this time your demagogue becomes Russia and Putin, as opposed to people of color and immigrants and Muslims. And I don't know, he's got such a long list, I can't even begin.
Putin's not a great guy. We can all agree.
Putin's an autocrat without question. And RT has me on because I critique American empire and American power. It's the same reason when I lived in Eastern Europe, the only way I could hear Václav Havel was listen to Voice of America. But that's the sadness of it. I mean, the fact that there isn't room for that critique within our society, and there isn't, is an indication of how constricted, anemic, and broken our media landscape has become. So let's get to the question. So I think what happened is critics such as myself, Ralph Nader, I'm close to Ralph, Noam Chomsky, who of course I admire immensely, we were always on the margins, but we were tolerated because we weren't particularly threatening and we didn't have a huge audience. And then as the veil of neoliberal ideology was taken down and people began to see how destructive this ideological force was and how it never made any rational economic sense. I mean, it came out of Ayn Rand and Hayek. I mean, these absolutely marginalized and discredited figures. So then you began to see, both on the right and the left, a loss of credibility. The neoliberalism just lost credibility. Nobody was buying it anymore. And then the critics became dangerous because there was no counter argument. And that's when we saw, I mean, when I got hit, and I have been hit tremendously by these algorithms, was after the Washington Post published this, and it was anonymous, propaganda or not, and they listed all of the left-wing sites, Black Agenda Report, Counterpunch, Truthdig, etc., where critics like me ran. In fact, they listed the sites that run my stuff. So
they just
then,
looked where you are, and then they just ran
right
over.
there was. So what happened was then Google and Twitter and Facebook, who are all bonded to the security state, hired all these people, a lot of them who came out of the security apparatus, to impose algorithms to steer people away from this content. So we had a chart at Truthdig, it over the last year roughly, where it's called impressions. So if you'd gone on Google and typed in imperialism, for instance, and I'd written a story on imperialism, then it would come up if it was a recent story with other stuff. They created impressions so that it wouldn't come up. I mean, they really went after like WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and others. And it's almost the 1 year anniversary since he was hauled out of the embassy, of course. And I'm a strong defender of Julian. And
I'm just about to go there with the questions.
So, so you had in that chart, the referrals by impressions dropped from 700,000 to well below 200,000 as they perfected the algorithms. And if you look at the Director of National Intelligence report, Clapper's report, I think it was 2017 when he went after RT, it's totally revealing about what they're afraid of. It's like not a long report. You can read it online. I think it's like 22 pages, but 7 pages deal with RT, where I have my show. And the complaint, there's not one line in there complaining about Russia propaganda. What they complain about is giving a platform to Black Lives Matter activists, third-party candidates, anti-fracking activists. They totally expose what it is they're trying to shut down. And they've done a pretty effective job at it. I encourage people to take a look at Matt Taibbi's book, Hate Inc. On on one side of the front cover is Rachel Maddow, and on the other side is Sean Hannity, because they do exactly the same thing. And so, yeah, I'm very worried about what's happened and about how effective it's been at shutting out dissident voices.
What do you see? I mean, I see an continually increasing danger for journalists and truth tellers in the US, and especially given what is happening to Julian Assange. If he is extradited to the United States and prosecuted, what does that mean for journalists?
Well, it's the death of any independent investigation into the centers of power. I can't be more blunt. It is that ominous. Now, under the Espionage Act, you can prosecute somebody. This is the 1917 act passed by Woodrow Wilson, which was used to go after people who gave classified or secret information to a foreign power. That's what it was for. It was done to block anybody giving information to the Germans in World War I. It was used 3 times, I think, against whistleblowers, including Daniel Ellsberg, although he never went to trial. Obama used it 8 or 9 times, including against Snowden. And it is being used, of course, to justify, although I think there's no legal basis for it, the extradition of Julian, who's not an American citizen, for stuff that was published by WikiLeaks, although WikiLeaks is not a US-based news organization. And
so nothing to do with the United States other than that he published.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really frightening. And then if you follow the trial at Belmarsh, it's just a farce. I mean, the judge is so prejudiced. I mean, under the 2003 Extradition Act, you can't extradite people from Great Britain for political crimes. She's just ignored it. Julian's lawyers have asked that he not be trapped in a glass cage where he can barely hear anything. The prosecution, the prosecutors from the U.S. didn't object. She won't let him out of the cage. He gets strip searched. They again asked that he not be strip searched. All of his legal materials get confiscated for him as he goes back to the prison, so he can't prepare. I mean, this judge is a piece of work, but it's clear that she's directed. I mean, this is, she knows what she has to do. So if he comes back, and I'm afraid there's very little possibility that he won't, unless he dies of the coronavirus in Belmarsh, which is sweeping through the prison. Julian's health is very delicate and precarious, especially after 7 years trapped in this I was in it. I mean, visited him several times. They call it an embassy. It's just a second floor apartment. It's tiny. It probably has about 5 rooms.
We've all been in quarantine for a month and we're all ready to go crazy.
Oh, that's nothing.
7 years.
That's nothing compared to what, and you know, he had a little room in the back, and just to harass him, there was like a British police officer standing right outside the window in the building on the floor across from him. And then of course he was bugged and filmed, and then in the end, Lenin Moreno really harassed him, turned off his internet. I mean, it was just awful. It was psychological torture, which Niels Melzer, when he visited him, the UN rapporteur on torture, when he visited him in Belmarsh, said this guy's been under psychological torture. But anyway, he comes back. He's convicted. He's charged under the Espionage Act with 17 counts, 10 years. So it's 170 years, and then another 5 years for supposedly hacking into a government computer, which he didn't do, which is why they grabbed Chelsea Manning, put her in jail, because they want her to testify that he did, and she courageously has told the truth, for which high price she's paid, tried to commit suicide once again in jail. And then, so then you create a legal precedent, and anybody who possesses or publishes classified material, and remember they classify everything, can go to prison. That's what this is about. And I have published classified material on the front page of the New York Times, as has many investigative journalists. So yes, it is an absolutely dark, ominous moment, but it's
Chris,
kind of one more piece of the puzzle of corporate totalitarianism coming together.
Chris, what would you say to liberals who at one point were supportive of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, but after he released the Podesta emails, blame him for, in part for the election of Donald Trump?
I don't know, like what swear words can I use here?
All of them. We're
Well, I mean, the hubris of this, as if the public doesn't have a right to know that Hillary Clinton was talking out of both sides of her mouth, saying one thing to her big Wall Street donors like Lloyd Blankfein, and Goldman Sachs paid her $675,000 for 3 lectures, which can only be described as a bribe, that she and the Clinton campaign were active in terms of making sure Trump was the Republican nominee because they assumed they could crush him, that she was this huge architect of the Libyan war, which was an utter fiasco because she thought it would burnish her presidential credentials. Does the public not have a right to know that stuff? I guess this is what the liberals are arguing, but if you do argue that, you better not call yourself a journalist.
Well, I think they're arguing that the public has a right to know, but maybe they could have held off until after November. Because I mean,
then you should all go read the Grand Inquisitor, because it's not our job to start manipulating information. And this was
not that I'm a huge Hillary fan, but I am a fan of gay rights and civil rights and some of the things that I think may have been better under a Clinton presidency, regardless of the fact that the belief of economic, just the neoliberalism part,
all of that
economics is still there.
All of that is true, and but this gets into the whole argument of the least worst voting. I mean, Trump is a product of a failed or decayed system. He's what's vomited up when the system doesn't work, and the Democrats are complicit in this. I just did a Zoom thing, with Daniel Ellsberg and Marjorie Cohen on for the Courage Foundation about the 1-year anniversary of seizing Julian at the embassy. Now, Marjorie Cohen and Daniel Ellsberg are 2 moral titans. I mean, I admire them immensely. And at the end, they made a pitch about voting for Biden. And I kept thinking, yeah, but Biden would be extraditing Assange as enthusiastically as the Trump administration. And at what point do we just stop and stand up for what it is? I mean, Biden's record is awful. I teach in a prison. Half of my students wouldn't be there but for Joe Biden. At what point do we just, and that's the problem with the liberal elites, is we have not had the moral fortitude to walk away, which we should have done with NAFTA, and stand with the working class. The working class, and much of my family comes out of the working class from rural Maine, has been so viciously and ruthlessly betrayed by the liberal elites that they've fallen into the arms of this frightening, narcissistic demagogue out of rage and out of anger. And that's because we didn't stand with them when we should.
Well, now what do we do? We can't have another Trump here in the US. And this gets to this is great conversation, by the way. I'm asking you questions that I know the people are wanting to ask, because there are radicals in the Democratic Party, or there are Democratic progressives who consider themselves on the far left, but still within the party. There are, and then all the way to Republicans who call themselves Democrats, or conservatives who call themselves Democrats. We're left with, as you said, just one choice in your most recent article, choice for president.
Sure, who's going to manage the corporate state? That's it. So, is it going to be Biden? And of course, the elites prefer Biden, just as they preferred Clinton. They find Trump to be an embarrassment. I love this, mantra of the least worst, because when Bernie was surging and Warren was doing well, you had a series of articles in the New York Times interviewing the Democratic donor class, including Blankfein, who said, if Bernie or Warren, and in particularly Bernie, is the nominee, we're all going to vote for Trump. So the least work only matters for us. It doesn't matter for them. They have to make sure that the power and wealth that they have, that this cabal has accumulated, remains untouched, and the disfiguration of American society continues. And they know Biden will do that. And that, in the short term, you're right. Who wants Trump as president? I used to think I couldn't stand the sound of George W. Bush's voice. Oh, now I long for Bush. But these are the kinds of figures that come from a decayed and broken system. And we're going to have to bring that system down. And we can't do it through the Democratic Party. I and Shama Sawan had spoken with Bernie in 2016 about how the Democratic Party would never give him the nomination. He had to run as an independent, that we weren't going to build a viable alternative movement during an election cycle, and that he just was this sheepdog. I can't remember who used that term first, but it's pretty smart. Maybe Glenn Ford. But yeah, that's what he's done. And now he's going to go around and speak to rallies of like 150 people saying vote for Joe Biden, which is what happened when he did for Clinton. His crowds evaporated. And I think he was really hurt by that, and by his decision to be a kind of lapdog for Chuck Schumer for 4 years, as if the Democratic Party was ever going to play fair. It just was incredibly naive. Or do you think he really just didn't have a chance to, say, pull a Nader and run as an independent? No, I asked him. I was there. He said, I don't want to be Nader. This was 2016 on the eve of the climate march. We did an event together. He said, I don't want to end up like Ralph Nader. Now, he's not wrong. The Democratic Party would have crucified him. They would have tried to take him down in Vermont in his Senate campaign. He would have, he sits with the Democratic caucus. He has seniority. They would have taken all that away from him. They would have mounted a vicious media campaign to, discredit and character assassination, which is what they did with Ralph, what they've done with Julian. All of that is right. But I really interpreted that as a form of political cowardice, that he didn't want to pay that price. He wasn't wrong, by the way, about the price that he was going to pay. But I don't believe that we're going to wrest back our open society through the Democratic Party, which is funded and run by lobbyists, just like the Republican Party. That's exactly what our question is, coming in from Rebecca from ACT. She's actually a team member here at ACT TV. How do we tear down the empire? What does the revolution look like to you at this point? Well, that you were playing a clip from Extinction Rebellion. Yes. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's it. That's why I'm a strong supporter of Extinction Rebellion, and nonviolent, massive, sustained civil disobedience that shut the system down. That's it. And we've seen it around the
Why
world.
are the people who are on the front lines at this coronavirus crisis, who are being asked to, continue to go to work without any protection,
No, this
risking
is a
their own? Why
problem.
are they not walking off the job? Is the
They
question.
will, and I mean, we're headed for an economic free fall. One collapse would be like a house of cards. I mean, people stop paying their rent, and then they stop paying their credit cards, and the repercussions of this are immense. We've so grossly mishandled the coronavirus. It's just going to come in wave after wave after wave.
Do you really think people are, there's all this talk about people waking up now that they see how things are being handled around the coronavirus? I don't really think it's a matter of people.
Can you hear me? I lost you.
Corporate state fails the people that we're all having to share in, so we can't pretend like we don't see it. But at what point do we say, okay, we're done trying to convince other people that this is a good idea, and I don't know, take to the street or do the civil disobedience?
It doesn't depend on us. We're not quite as important as sometimes we like to think we are. I'm speaking for myself. I didn't anticipate Occupy Wall Street. I was there, spent a lot of time in Zuccotti, and admired the people very much, but I didn't foresee it. I was kind of walking around like Eeyore, saying we're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed. What happens with uprisings? I'm actually in the middle of because now I kind of like. I mean, it's an awful thing to say. I like the effects of Corona, not Corona. I mean, the social isolation, because I don't really want to socialize with anyone in Princeton where I live anyway. So now it's the perfect excuse. And
I hear you. We almost just moved to New Jersey ourselves, but the coronavirus saved us from such a fate.
So I get to do my show remotely, and I fired from Truthdig. So I'm reading Trotsky's History of the Revolution, which is about 1,000 pages long. Look, I mean, Trotsky's right, and I know because I covered it, that you as a reporter, the tinder is there. So all of us knew the tinder was there among the Palestinians during the first Intifada or uprising, 1987, which I covered. The second Intifada, I covered the revolutions in Eastern Europe, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Romania. I covered the street demonstrations that brought down Slobodan Milosevic in Belgrade. And I remember actually being with Djindjic, who was later assassinated by Serb security. But thousands of people were down in the square. I mean, tens of thousands were down in the square. And I remember Djindjic asking around, what do they want? You're trying to read the zeitgeist of this. It has a kind of life force of its own. And Trotsky, for his brilliant, he's also quite a fine writer. He was a journalist himself. He gets that. So the tinder is there. What ignites it? It's usually something very banal, like the vegetable vendor who set himself on fire in Tunisia. Mm-hmm. The first Intifada was caused by a car accident. An Israeli vehicle truck hit a van carrying Palestinian day workers, and 7 were killed. I mean, so it is a mysterious force. And so the tinder's all there. What will ignite it? When will it be ignited? Will it be ignited? People like me who look at it and study it can't. No, I mean, you had Lenin, not a Leninist, but you had Lenin sitting in Zurich giving a talk. Those of us who are old, I remember how old he was, in his 50s, will never see the revolution. And then like 2 weeks later, he's at Finland Station and the Russian Revolution is taking place. So, and this was also true in East Germany. They just didn't, events, I mean, suddenly, you have a few dozen was led by Lutheran clergy in East Germany, in Leipzig, walking around with candles in Leipzig. And then suddenly there's 500,000 people in Alexanderplatz in East Berlin. So what is it that ignites it? But certainly the fragility of the system, the inability of the system to address the most basic needs of the citizenry was all there before, and now it's been exacerbated. And I don't think that people can take a lot more. How will it?
Definitely not.
And remember, it can go the wrong way. I mean, it can always. The 1930s in Europe went one way in countries like Italy and Germany. and Spain, and we went another because of Roosevelt. But it can, our left is so broken and destroyed. Our media is a joke. We could just go the other way. I mean, we are headed the other way, actually.
It does seem like with Bernie out, there's actually no savior left. And so all the people who had hoped for a savior in terms of within inter-party electoral savior are now left saviorless. And that does seem like, there's matches, not all in one place on the fire.
Yeah, well, that is true, but this was the problem of the left. Bernie was never the savior. I voted for him in the primary, of course, but I
got to vote in a primary.
Not in this. No, that was 2016.
Right.
Our primary is delayed. So,
yeah.
But Bernie was never going to be the savior. Bernie is in all but name a Democrat, a member of the Democratic Party establishment. And if he had actually gotten into power, which they would never allow, because if he'd gotten the nominee, it would have been 1972 with McGovern, where you had both sides of the party elites ganging up to destroy him, along with MSNBC and everyone else. So if he'd gotten into power, he would have been completely paralyzed. I mean, imagine he would have, and in a way, it would have been worse because he would have been mocked and ridiculed. And the only hope left are movements. I mean, movements are always the way. Go back and read Zinn's People's History of the United States. Change comes through movements. Of course, it's better to have somebody a little more enlightened, but the job of the American or any citizenry is to keep those in power in fear, to keep them in check. And history has just borne that out over and over and over and over. And we kind of lost that lesson, and a lot of it is because of the media. But we're going to have to build. I mean, look, I've spent months and months of my life with the Palestinians. I'm an Arabic speaker in Gaza. I spent 7 years in the Middle East. When Barack Obama got up and gave that speech to AIPAC in 2016, on that campaign, I said, okay, that's it. I don't care if I'm the only one in America standing with the Palestinian people. I'm standing with the Palestinian people. And we have to begin to think like that if we're going to be effective. I mean, to have a whole seminar for an hour and a half on Julian Assange, and I don't want to diss Ellsberg or Cohen, because they are two people I admire immensely, make a pitch for Biden, which really had nothing to do with the seminar. I'm thinking, I know what Julian would say. I know Julian, and he would not tell you to vote for Biden, who would be an enthusiastic hangman. And so I think we have to stop playing their game, and we have to stand fast for what it is we believe, even if that makes us pariahs and pushes us into the political wilderness.
Chris, are you seeing the coronavirus outbreak embolden those forces of corporate fascism? And if so, what ways is this happening?
Well, first of all, the money. So they went and stole all our money, just like 2008. I mean, it is.
It's like so crazy. Oh, something's happening. Let's steal all the money. It's right. The first thing that occurs to them.
No, like bailing out the airline industry. Well, that's a priority. Or
no one's going anywhere.
It's so
we're stuck in our house and we have to give all this money to the airline industry. I mean, it's comedic.
Okay. I mean, they did throw us, peasants a few crumbs, like a check.
I haven't gotten my peasant check yet,
which of course will go right to your landlord or your credit card company.
I haven't gotten it yet. Still looking for that.
I don't think I qualify, but anyway. And then what? I mean, what do they think's going to happen in 4 months when the unemployment runs out? So that's one. And then, of course, it emboldens. I mean, Chomsky's right. Trump is an existential threat to American democracy, but I would argue that basically American democracy it's a failed democracy at this point anyway. So
there's a comment coming in from Opt-Out CA. Don't worry, nothing a few courses of austerity can't fix.
Yeah, well, that's right. So, yeah, I mean, Daniel Berrigan, the great priest, used to say, the problem with these oligarchs is the only one word they ever can utter is more. So there's no internal or external impediment to what they're doing, and they're so myopic and so blind. I mean, this guy Mnuchin, I mean, this guy's the foreclosure king. Yeah, they will just keep taking more and more and more. They're completely out of touch. They don't live in America. They live in what a writer for the New Yorker called a richistan. Buy commercial. They don't. I mean, the hedge fund managers go off. I'm not making this up because I know one is on a private island in the South Pacific waiting out the corona. Or who was this guy who was on his, like, I don't know.
Is he growing his own food? Like, what is he
I don't
cooking
know.
for himself? I don't think these people know how to really self-care.
No, well, they have serfs out there, who they probably, I don't know,
they sprayed down with hand
wire enclosures at night or something. So, yeah, I mean, so and this is true with anytime a cabal seizes power and shuts down systems of information, then they are the engine for civil unrest, because they have no ability to constrain themselves, and that's what the coronavirus has kind of exacerbated. So I expect serious problems. I mean, yes, in terms of civil unrest, and I expect pretty draconian responses from our internal security systems, and you can look at Ferguson to get a sense of what that will look like. That's militarized police in armored personnel carriers with 50 caliber machine guns pointed at nonviolent protesters.
You just brought me to my next question, which is, how close are we to a true police state? It's been reported that President Trump's Department of Justice sent documents to Congress requesting a suspension of the rules for habeas corpus. That can't be good.
Yeah, well, I mean, Hannah Arendt in The Origins of Totalitarianism lays out this process. And what happens is that a segment of your population, and she herself was stripped of her German citizenship, they become stateless. They don't have rights. So that's what's happened in our deindustrialized urban centers where poor people of color live. They've already been stripped of due process, habeas corpus. 94% of the people in our prison system never had a jury trial. They're coerced into pleading out, often to crimes they didn't commit. You have police, the ability of heavily armed, militarized, with long-barreled weapons and Kevlar vests to carry out lethal force. I think 1,000 people are murdered a year in these, what Malcolm X called these internal colonies. Police are almost never held accountable, even when they're filmed carrying out these kind of activity on cell phones. And so you both have the legal and the physical mechanisms to create a dystopian totalitarian state. And Arendt writes that this is very dangerous, because once unrest spreads throughout the wider society, and once rights become privileges with the flick of a switch, everybody. And so that's all the legal and physical mechanisms are already there.
Especially with the joining of, Facebook and your phone to electronically leash and surveil you.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, they're using I'm doing some reading about this, and it seems like they're using the coronavirus as another excuse for this pro-corporate, pro-police state agenda, which is to, follow you everywhere. And, I've read things about them wanting to give, I don't know if this is accurate, I'm just trying to look into what's going on, but them basically trying to use the coronavirus and its virulence and its danger to society as an excuse to basically have to show papers in order to go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, just look at what's happening to the Uyghurs, because that's the future. And you have all these Silicon Valley AI companies over there helping the Chinese. That's kind of the model. It is kind of Animal Farm. I mean, that tiny little elite will have everything, will have nothing. And the mechanisms of control, which are the most sophisticated in human history, and we're watched, of course, 24 hours a day. And we, of course, can't wait to help them by going on Google and carrying around our tracking devices. That when the government watches you 24 hours a day, you can't use the word liberty. That is the relationship of a master and a slave. And we're already watched. We're the most watched, monitored, photographed, surveilled population in human history. And all of our information is stored in perpetuity so they can use it whenever they want. And they will use it. And if we become a problem, we have created the most efficient form of totalitarianism. I mean, I just did the last show that was broadcast on Contact was with Bill Binney, and we talked about this Swiss company that did encryption devices, which the CIA ran and all that. But I was asking him. Bill Binney was in the NSA. He's a whistleblower. He actually was one of the major architects of Trailblazer, which is used to monitor all of us. And then he got out and told the American public, and he's paid a heavy price for it. But he's saying now, because of the internet, the system of surveillance is so much more efficient than it has ever been, that they can just tap into these electronic data systems, and they have everything. So that's going to make it extremely difficult to organize. I mean, when I was involved with Occupy, after Bloomberg, in his first failed attempt to shut down Zuccotti Park, the Direct Action Committee came down to Princeton for a couple of days. It camped out on my floor. And were taking my kid, who was like 4 or 5, on their shoulders, running up and down the street, as fast as they could, much to my wife's dismay. But yes. They're great. They're amazing people. So, but anyway, they wanted to figure out a way that they knew Bloomberg was going to come back. They knew the park was going to shut down, but they wanted to figure out some kind of a protest to show. And the park was just riddled with agents provocateurs, a lot of them in the Black Bloc, spies, guys. I mean, they were kind of, it was out of Doonesbury in a way. It was these kind of buff guys with a backpack who always said they were from Reed College, and they were there. I don't know why they picked Reed College. And you could always tell who they were, because they were always like trying to chat people up, saying, so who's the leader? Who's the leader here? Like, there was.
And you try to explain to them that it's
like the Wizard of Oz in some tent somewhere. And so they went to the medical tent and said this to the woman who ran the medical tent. And they go, so who's the leader here? And this is one of these cops. And she goes, well, I am. And he goes, really? And he goes, what are you in charge of? She goes, everything. He goes, what's your title? And she goes, God. So how did I get off on that tangent? Oh yeah. So anyway, they decided that they were going to do some kind of a protest when they came back. But now this was before Snowden. All the electronic equipment went into my car outside in the driveway. Nothing was discussed. We only wrote on pieces of paper, and then we burned them in the fireplace. So, and it could have been, but there wasn't, somebody within that group who was, working on behalf of the security state. And the decision was that when they invaded, they would chain themselves to the kitchen, which was in the central part of Zuccotti. So when they went in, Bloomberg went in again to shut down the park. They got to the kitchen, and there were 20 activists chained, and they didn't have chain cutters. And it was just a way to say to the police, you don't know everything. But that's the world we inhabit. We inhabited then and now, and that's the world we're going to inhabit.
The people in the chat are upset, I would say, that this is kind of, it's a dark time, and sometimes even hearing about the reality of what is dark. How do you, and I know that you were a seminarian at one point, how do you not drink yourself into a stupor? How do you deal with the ugliness of the world?
You can't unless you have real relationships with the oppressed. Mm-hmm. So why did I react the way I did when Obama gave his speech to AIPAC? Because I have people I care deeply about in Gaza as friends, and I'm not going to betray them, and I just can't. Why did I lose my job at the New York Times? Because I have friends in Iraq. I mean, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I knew that they would die, and some of them did die in that war. And I can't betray them. I teach in a prison. If you don't walk out of a prison and you're not angry, something's wrong with you. So I think the problem with the liberal class is that oppressed people are abstractions. And that's what's dangerous, and that's what kills us. But when those of us who are privileged, especially white American men, have real relationships, which doesn't mean that I pretend to understand where they're coming from or what their lives were like. I try to understand, but I'm also cognizant, because I spent 20 years in the developing world, that privilege is a form of blindness. And as much as you struggle to understand what it's like, for instance, to be a Palestinian in Gaza, you never can. And if you honor that division between privilege and oppression, and recognize and acknowledge that blindness, then you can have real relationships with oppressed people. Most of my students are African American, very poor, and that's what keeps you whole, because it becomes personal, and hope becomes personal, not rational, I suppose. And I mean, I have taught for 10 years in the prisons, and I have one student who was picked up at the age of 14 for a crime I'm 100% certain he did not commit, coerced. He was 14 years old. He weighs 90 pounds, by 3 detectives in a Camden City police station to sign a confession he can barely read. He's declared an adult at 16. He's tried at 17. And he's given a sentence where he's not eligible to go before a parole board until he's 70 years old. So I taught a course called Conquest. He's one of my best students. He's got a 4.0 average. This is all through Rutgers University, which allows them to earn their BA degrees in prison. It's a great program. And he waits after class. We read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Open Veins of Latin American, C.L.R. James's Black Jacobins, on the Haitian slave revolt, only successful slave revolt in human history, and Haiti's been paying for it ever since. And so he's my only A+, and he waits till the class leaves, and he says, I know I'm going to die in this prison, but I work as hard as I do because one day I'm going to be a teacher like you. And he walks out. That's hope. I didn't change the world, but I can live on that. I still live on that for a long time. And maybe we only change the world one person at a time anyway. But I think the problem of liberal elites is that they actually don't have relationships with oppressed people. And that's dangerous, because when you have real relationships, you will, and you care, you will stand with those people no matter what. And you will be angry at what is done to those people. And that's what Augustine says: hope has 2 beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they don't remain the way they are. And I think rooted in those personal relationships will keep you whole and keep you radical. But if you don't have those relationships, it's very easy to fall into despair and cynicism.
Chris Hedges, thank you so much. First of all, thanks for staying on with us for, I think, twice or maybe 3 times as long as we had asked you to stay. It was really nice to hear from you in this time, and just to reconnect with you. And I look forward to seeing what happens over at Truthdig. And please let me or us in the independent media know what we can do to help the people at Truthdig, and to kind of keep getting those messages out there. I think pretty much everyone who's following us on Facebook or in the stream on Twitch knows who Chris Hedges is, and you're probably already following him. But on Twitter, it's Chris Lynn Hedges, LYNNHEDGES. I will put the Twitter link in our chats. Everyone is thanking you, and thanks a lot, Chris. I hope you'll come back and join us again soon. And I look forward to the next book. What's it about?
It's prisons. It's on prisons.
Oh, good. It's good timing.
Great. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Okay,
all right,
bye.
Chris. Catch you next time.
Yep.